What if a single, sarcastic comment could shatter your reality? For Elena Rossi, a 26-year-old waitress drowning in debt and exhaustion, it was just another Tuesday. When a quiet stranger asked her what she wanted most in the world, she laughed and said, "A day off." She never expected to see him again. But the next morning, a black car, a silent courier, and a small, heavy box arrived at her door. Inside was a key to a world she couldn't imagine, an unlimited credit card, and a note with a single question that would force her to confront a past she never knew existed. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a simple wish exposed a devastating secret. The smell of stale coffee and industrial grease was the perfume of Elena Rossi's life. It clung to her clothes, her hair, and she was sure, deep in her pores. At 26, her world had shrunk to the 30-foot stretch of linoleum between the kitchen pass-through and the cracked vinyl booths of the Starlight Diner in a forgotten corner of Philadelphia. Her dreams of becoming an architect, of designing sun-drenched atriums and elegant public spaces, were buried under a mountain of medical bills and the relentless ticking of the clock. Each day was a precise, agonizing loop. Wake at 5 a.m. Check on her mother, Maria, making sure her medication was laid out and her breathing was even. The multiple sclerosis was a cruel thief, stealing Maria's mobility and strength piece by piece. Then, a quick shower, a stale piece of toast, and the bus ride to the diner for the 7:00 a.m. shift. She'd work until 3 p.m., rush home to care for her mum, and then head to her second job, cleaning offices downtown from 7 p.m. to midnight. Sleep was a luxury she rented in 4-hour increments. This Tuesday was particularly brutal. A tour bus had broken down nearby, flooding the diner with grumpy, demanding tourists. Elena moved in a blur of motion, her smile a practiced, brittle mask. Her arches screamed, a hot nerve in her shoulder pulsed with every tray she lifted, and a headache hammered behind her eyes. "Excuse me, miss." A man snapped his fingers. "This coffee is lukewarm. Are you even trying?" "Right away, sir. My apologies," Elena said, her voice a smooth, automated response she no longer had to think about. By 9 p.m., the chaos had subsided, leaving behind a battlefield of sticky tables and dirty plates. She was supposed to have finished hours ago, but her co-worker had called in sick, and Sal, the diner's owner, had begged her to stay. He'd slip her an extra 50, he'd promised, his eyes full of pity she couldn't stand. Only one customer remained, sitting in the corner booth that was usually reserved for truckers on their long hauls. He'd been there for 2 hours, nursing a single cup of black coffee. He was an anomaly in the starlight. His suit, a deep charcoal grey, was impeccably tailored. It probably cost more than her mother's last hospital visit. He wore no tie, the collar of his crisp white shirt unbuttoned, but he still radiated an aura of quiet, formidable power. He hadn't looked at his phone once. He just watched. He watched the chaos, he watched Sal curse at the grill, and mostly, he watched her. Elena felt his gaze not as a threat, but as a curiosity. It was unnerving. Finally, summoning the last dregs of her energy, she walked over with the coffee pot. "More coffee, sir?" she asked, her voice raspy. He looked up, and for the first time she saw his eyes. They were a startlingly clear shade of blue, etched with a weariness that looked ancient. He seemed to be in his early 30s, with sharp, aristocratic features and dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead. He looked less like a customer and more like a man who had gotten lost and ended up in a different universe. "No, thank you," he said, his voice low and smooth. "You look exhausted." It wasn't a pickup line. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with a strange sort of empathy. The observation was so direct, so devoid of artifice that it broke through her professional shell. A humorless laugh escaped her lips. Exhausted is my default setting. It's the new normal. He gestured to the empty seat opposite him. May I? She glanced at the clock. She was already late for her cleaning job, but something in his eyes, a shared exhaustion, perhaps, made her sink into the vinyl booth. Her legs throbbed with gratitude. You've been here for hours, she noted, rubbing her temples. I needed a quiet place, he said. My father passed away recently. I've been settling his affairs. It's loud, all of it. I'm sorry for your loss, she said, the perfunctory phrase feeling inadequate. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. My name is Julian, he finally offered. Elena. He studied her, his gaze intense, but not invasive. You handle this place, the rudeness, the chaos, with a strange kind of grace. She snorted. It's called desperation. Grace is for people with options. The words were more bitter than she'd intended. A look of something unreadable flickered across his face. He leaned forward slightly, his cufflinks catching the dim light. Let me ask you something, Elena. If you could have anything in the world, right now, no limits, no logic, what would you want most? It was such a bizarre, philosophical question for a greasy spoon diner at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. She looked around at the sticky ketchup bottles, the faded picture of a 1950s car on the wall, the life she was trapped in, the sheer absurdity of the question, of him, of this entire day bubbled up inside her. What did she want? She wanted her mother to be healthy. She wanted to finish her degree. She wanted to pay off the soul-crushing debt that kept her awake at night. But to say any of that to this stranger in a $1,000 suit would be to show him her wounds, to beg for a pity she didn't want. So, she gave him the only honest answer that cost her nothing. A genuine, tired smile touched her lips. Honestly, I'd want a day off, just one. 24 hours with no alarm clock, no bills to worry about, no one needing anything from me. A day where I can just stop. She expected him to chuckle, to offer a platitude. Instead, Julian simply nodded, a slow, thoughtful gesture. He looked at her as if she'd just handed him the solution to a complex equation. A day off, he repeated softly, as if tasting the words. Thank you for your honesty, Elena. He stood up, leaving a crisp $100 bill on the table, a ridiculous tip for a $2 coffee. Before she could protest, he was walking towards the door. Have a good night, he said over his shoulder. And then he was gone, disappearing into the dark street, leaving Eleanor in the quiet diner. The scent of his expensive cologne, a faint, alien presence in the greasy air. She stared at the $100 bill, a temporary salve on a gaping wound, and chalked the entire encounter up to the weirdness of a very, very long day. She never expected to see him again. She couldn't have been more wrong. The next morning began with a familiar, gut-wrenching panic. Maria had had a bad night. Her legs were racked with spasms, and a low-grade fever left her clammy and weak. Elena had been up every 2 hours, changing her mother's sheets, holding a cool cloth to her forehead, and whispering reassurances into the dark. By the time her 5 a.m. alarm blared, she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. She called Sal, her voice thick with exhaustion, and told him she couldn't make the morning shift. The guilt was immediate and heavy. Sal was already short-staffed, and she needed every single dollar. But Maria came first, always. After settling her mother with some broth and her morning medication, Elena collapsed onto her lumpy sofa, the unopened mail, mostly bills stamped with angry red letters, mocking her from the coffee table. She was calculating whether she could stretch their remaining groceries for another week when a sound from the street jolted her. It wasn't the usual rumble of the city bus or the shout of kids playing hooky. It was a low, powerful purr, the sound of an engine so refined it seemed to silence everything around it. Peeking through the blinds of her ground-floor apartment, she saw a car that didn't belong in her neighborhood of crumbling brick and graffiti-laced walls. It was a black sedan, long and sleek, polished to a mirror shine. It had no visible markings, just an air of quiet, intimidating expense. A man in a sharp black suit, complete with an earpiece, stepped out of the driver's side. He didn't look like a driver. He looked like a Secret Service agent. He walked with unnerving purpose to the front of her building and pressed her buzzer. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Was it a debt collector? Had the hospital sent someone? Her mind raced through a Rolodex of financial horrors. With trembling hands, she pressed the intercom button. "Hello? Elena Rossi." The voice was deep, professional, and devoid of emotion. "Yes? I have a delivery for you from Mr. Sterling." Sterling. The name didn't register. She didn't know any Sterling. "I think you have the wrong person. You work at the Starlight Diner. You spoke with him last night." The realization hit her like a physical blow. Julian. His last name was Sterling. Of course it was. A name like that belonged on a building, not in a diner. "What is this?" she asked, her voice a suspicious whisper. "If you could please come down, ma'am. I'm required to deliver this to you in person." Hesitantly, she unlatched the 3 locks on her door and stepped into the grimy hallway. The man stood at the building's entrance, holding a small, matte black box about the size of a book. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his expression unreadable. He held out a tablet. "I just need your signature here, Ms. Rossi." She scribbled something illegible, and he handed her the box. It was surprisingly heavy, cool to the touch. It bore no markings, no brand names. "What's in it?" she asked. "My instructions were to deliver the package and wait for your confirmation," he said, his eyes looking straight through her. "Mr. Sterling will contact you shortly." Before she could ask another question, he turned, walked back to the silent car, and was gone. The entire exchange had taken less than a minute. Back in her apartment, she stared at the box as if it were a bomb. What kind of game was this? Was this rich man's idea of a joke? A cruel prank to laugh about with his friends at the country club? She pried open the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a credit card. It was made of metal, heavy and cold, and anodized in a stark, intimidating black. There was no bank name, just a simple, elegant S monogram, and her name, Elena Rossi. Below it was another, smaller card, like a business card, made of the same heavy stock as the box. On it, in clean, silver typography, was a phone number and a short, handwritten note. "Elena, you asked for a day off. Please take more than one. Take as many as you need. This card has no preset spending limit. Use it for whatever you want or need. Groceries, bills, your mother's care, a new apartment, anything. Consider it a grant from an admirer of resilience, no strings attached. Julian Sterling." Elena dropped the card as if it had burned her. This was insane, a joke. It had to be a fake, a prop. No one just gave away a limitless credit card. No one. She paced her small living room, her mind a maelstrom of confusion, suspicion, and a terrifying sliver of hope. Her eyes fell on the pharmacy bill sitting on her counter. A new experimental drug for Maria's MS. It wasn't covered by their threadbare insurance. The cost was $4,800 for a 3-month supply, a cost that had made her physically ill when she first saw it, a cost that was utterly impossible. On a desperate, wild impulse, she grabbed her coat, the black card, and the bill. She walked the 3 blocks to the pharmacy, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt like a fraud, a thief. The pharmacist, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, who always looked at her with pity, gave her a sad smile. "Here to pay a little more on the account, dear?" Eleanor's throat was dry. She couldn't speak. She just pushed the bill and the black card across the counter. Mrs. Gable picked up the card, her eyebrows shooting up. "My goodness, I've only ever seen one of these in a magazine. Are you sure, Elena?" Elena just nodded, holding her breath. Mrs. Gable swiped the card. The machine beeped. A tense silence stretched as the transaction processed. Elena was sure an alarm would go off, that police would storm the pharmacy. Then, a soft whirring sound as the receipt printed. Approved. Amount $4,800 remaining, balance $0. Mrs. Gable handed her the receipt and the card, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and wonder. "Well, everything's all set, dear. I'll have that prescription ready for you in 10 minutes. Elena stared at the receipt. The zeros stared back at her. A debt that had been a crushing weight on her chest, a monster in her dreams, had just vanished. Poof! Gone. She stumbled out of the pharmacy and leaned against the brick wall outside, the receipt clutched in her hand. The relief was so sudden, so immense, that it felt like pain. It was a physical sensation, a dam inside her breaking. Sobs racked her body, raw and loud. She wasn't just crying for the paid bill. She was crying for the years of struggle, for every missed meal, for every sleepless night, for the sheer, grinding hopelessness of her life. And as the relief washed over her, a new, colder emotion took its place. Fear. Nothing was free, especially not this. A man like Julian Sterling didn't do things without a reason. This wasn't a grant. It was a leash, a down payment, a contract she had just signed without reading the terms. She had her mother's medicine. She had a path out of the darkness. But she had a terrifying feeling she had just sold something invaluable in return. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. An unknown number. She knew, with chilling certainty, who it was. She answered, her hand still shaking. "Hello? Elena, it's Julian Sterling," the familiar, smooth voice said. "I trust the delivery was acceptable." "Acceptable?" Elena's voice was a tight, incredulous whisper. She was walking now, aimlessly, through the familiar, cracked sidewalks of her neighborhood, the black card feeling like a lead weight in her pocket. You can't just do this. You can't just drop a magic wand into someone's life and walk away. What is this? There was a pause on the other end of the line. She could hear the faint, muted sound of traffic, far different from the city buses and sirens she was used to. It was the sound of distant, insulated wealth. "It is exactly what the note said it is," Julian replied, his tone calm and even, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. "You were honest with me. I wanted to reciprocate. There are no hidden clauses, Elena, no expectations. People like you don't do things without expectations," she shot back, the words laced with a lifetime of cynicism. "What do you want from me? Am I supposed to be grateful? Indebted? Is this some sort of down payment for services to be rendered later?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. She expected him to be offended, to get angry. Instead, he was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, tinged with something that sounded like regret. "I understand your suspicion," he said, "and I apologize if my methods were abrupt. The world I live in has made me accustomed to solving problems with money. It's a blunt instrument, I know. That's why I'm calling. I'm not asking for your gratitude. I'm asking for a conversation. We had a conversation last night. We had an introduction. I'd like to have a real one. No diner, no distractions. Just an hour of your time. If, at the end of that hour, you want to cut the card in half and never hear from me again, I will respect that. My driver can pick you up. Elena's mind was spinning. Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to run from this man and the impossible, terrifying power he wielded so casually. But then she thought of her mother's relieved smile when she'd brought home the medication. She thought of the eviction notice hidden in her drawer. This wasn't just about her pride anymore. "Not your driver," she said, her voice firm. She needed to retain some semblance of control. "I'll meet you. Public place. You choose." "Of course," he said, without a hint of surprise. "There's a small place, the Orangery, at the Botanical Gardens. It's quiet. Tomorrow, at 1 p.m.? Fine." She hung up without saying goodbye, her heart a frantic drum. The next day, Eleanor stood before her cracked wardrobe mirror, filled with a sense of hopeless inadequacy. Her entire wardrobe consisted of worn jeans, faded t-shirts, and her 2 waitress uniforms. The Botanical Gardens, the Orangery. It sounded like a place where people didn't have grease stains on their clothes. With a deep sigh, she took the black card. She walked to a modest department store downtown, a place she'd only ever window shopped. She felt like an imposter, her hands sweating as she sifted through racks of clothes. She finally settled on a simple, dark green dress, a pair of comfortable but elegant flats, and a light trench coat. The total came to more than she made in 2 weeks. At the register, she presented the card, bracing for it to be declined, for the charade to be over. Approved. The feeling was a dizzying mix of power and shame. The Orangery was a glass-walled cafe overlooking a stunning rose garden. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the polished wood floors and quiet patrons. It was a world away from the Starlight Diner. Julian was already there, sitting at a secluded table. He wasn't wearing a suit today, but a simple navy blue cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the air of quiet authority still clung to him. He stood as she approached. "Elena, thank you for coming. Let's just get this over with," she said, sitting down without meeting his eyes. A waiter appeared instantly, but Julian waved him away. "They'll leave us be." He didn't speak for a moment, simply observing her with those disconcertingly perceptive blue eyes. "My father," he began, his voice low, "was Robert Sterling. He built Sterling Industries from the ground up. He was a brilliant man, ruthless, demanding, and powerful. When he died 2 months ago, he left everything to me. The company, the fortune, the responsibilities. And I've discovered I don't know who I am without him telling me what to do." Elena said nothing, unsure where this was going. "For the past 2 months," he continued, "I've been surrounded by lawyers, accountants, board members, people who want something. My signature, my approval, my money. Every word they say is calculated. Every compliment is a transaction. I went to that diner the other night to escape. It was one of my father's guilty pleasures. He said it was the only place in the city where people were genuinely miserable and didn't try to hide it." The corner of Eleanor's mouth twitched. He wasn't wrong. "And then I met you," Julian said, leaning forward. "You were drowning. I could see it. Anyone could. But you weren't asking for a lifeline. You were just enduring. And when I asked you that stupid, grandiose question, you didn't ask for $1 million or a new car. You asked for something so simple, so human, it stopped me in my tracks. A day off. You reminded me of what's real." He paused, letting the words settle. "The card isn't a leash, Elena. It's an apology. An apology for my clumsy attempt to help. But it's also an offer. I'm starting a charitable foundation in my father's name, meant to fund community projects, healthcare initiatives, things that actually matter. The problem is, I'm surrounded by people who have never worried about a medical bill or an eviction notice in their lives. Their idea of charity is a black tie gala. I need a perspective that isn't insulated by a billion-dollar fortune. I need a reality check." He looked at her directly. "I want to offer you a job as a consultant for the Sterling Foundation. I'm not talking about a token position. I want you to vet proposals, visit sites, and tell me, with the same honesty you showed me in that diner, what's real and what's for show. I'll pay you a salary that will ensure you and your mother are comfortable. You'll answer to no one but me." Elena was stunned into silence. A job, a real job, using her mind, her experiences. It was a lifeline so far beyond her wildest dreams that she couldn't process it. "Why me?" she finally managed to ask. "You could hire anyone. Experts, professionals with degrees." "I don't want an expert," he said firmly. "I have dozens of them. They know how to analyze data and write reports. I want someone who knows the cost of a carton of milk and a bottle of insulin. I want you, Elena. Because you don't want anything from me. That makes you the most valuable person I've met in years." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. This wasn't a game. It was a genuine, albeit eccentric, offer. She thought about her life, the endless cycle of exhaustion and fear, and now this man was offering her not just an escape, but a purpose, a way to turn her hardships into a strength. But the suspicion, learned and ingrained, still lingered. "And the card? Keep it," he said. "Use it to get settled. Find a better apartment, one that's accessible for your mother. Hire a full-time nurse if you need to. Eliminate the distractions. I need your mind clear. Consider it a signing bonus. Your salary will begin once you officially accept." He slid a folder across the table. It contained a formal job offer, with a salary figure that made her gasp, and the contact information for his personal assistant, a man named Arthur Pence, who would handle all the logistics. "Think about it," Julian said, standing up. "No pressure. But I hope you'll say yes." He left her there, alone, in the sun-drenched cafe, with a folder that contained a new life and a black card that held the power to unlock it. The price, she realized, wasn't what she had feared. The price was stepping into his world. And as she watched him walk through the rose garden, she had a premonition that the pristine, beautiful world of Julian Sterling had thorns she couldn't yet see. Saying yes was the easiest and hardest decision of Elena's life. The logical part of her brain, the part that had spent years juggling numbers and calculating risks, knew it was an opportunity she would be insane to refuse. But the emotional part, the part that had built a fortress around her heart to survive, screamed that it was a trap. In the end, logic, and the sight of her mother struggling to get up the 3 steps to their apartment, won. The 2 weeks that followed were a surreal whirlwind, orchestrated with silent, unnerving efficiency by Julian's assistant, Arthur Pence. Arthur was a man in his late 50s, with a perpetually calm demeanor and the organizational skills of a 5-star general. He moved Elena and her mother from their cramped, damp apartment into a stunning, light-filled condominium overlooking the Schuylkill River. It had hardwood floors, a state-of-the-art kitchen, and most importantly, was fully accessible, with a walk-in shower and wide doorways for the new power wheelchair that had simply appeared one afternoon. A highly recommended private nurse, a warm woman named Clara, was hired to provide round-the-clock care for Maria, whose health and spirits improved almost overnight in the comfortable new surroundings. For the first time in years, Elena could sleep through the night without listening for every cough or cry from her mother's room. The black card took care of everything. Old debts were erased with a few phone calls from Arthur. A new wardrobe, suitable for boardrooms and charity site visits, was curated by a personal shopper. It was a disorienting, dizzying transformation. One moment, she was counting tips to see if she could afford fresh vegetables. The next, she was signing a lease on an apartment whose monthly rent was more than her old annual income. But with the comfort came a creeping sense of unease. Her old life, as hard as it had been, was hers. This new life felt borrowed. She was living in Julian Sterling's world, under his protection. It was a gilded cage, and she hadn't yet figured out where the door was. Her first official day as a consultant for the Sterling Foundation was at the corporate headquarters of Sterling Industries. The building was a monument of glass and steel that scraped the sky, a physical manifestation of the Sterling power. Arthur escorted her to the 50th floor, where the Foundation's offices were located. They were a stark contrast to the corporate floors below: warm woods, soft lighting, and art from local charities on the walls. Julian met her in a large, airy conference room. "Welcome, Elena. I'm glad you accepted." "It's a lot to take in," she said, gesturing vaguely at the opulence around her. "The surroundings are just a tool," he said, sensing her discomfort. "The work is what matters. I have the first batch of proposals for you to review." He spent the next hour walking her through the Foundation's mission, his passion for the project evident in his every word. He wanted to do real, tangible good, and he genuinely believed she was the key to ensuring the Foundation didn't become another self-congratulatory vanity project for the rich. For the first time, Elena felt a flicker of genuine excitement. This was work she could believe in. The first major event on her calendar was a fundraising dinner for a new pediatric wing at a local hospital, heavily sponsored by the Sterling Foundation. It was her official introduction to Julian's world. Arthur had arranged for a couture gown to be sent to her apartment, a simple, elegant navy silk that made her feel like a princess in a fairy tale. But as she stood in the grand ballroom of a 5-star hotel, surrounded by a sea of tuxedos and jewels, she felt more like an imposter than ever. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of powerful people making powerful conversation. Julian found her by the champagne fountain, a reassuring presence in the overwhelming crowd. "You look stunning," he said, his eyes lingering on her for a fraction of a second too long. "I feel like I'm in costume," she admitted, her voice low. "In this room, everyone is," he murmured back. "Just smile and try not to look as bored as you feel." He began to introduce her to a few people, hospital administrators, city council members, always referring to her as his most trusted advisor at the Foundation. The title felt both absurd and validating. It was during one of these introductions that she saw her. A woman was watching them from across the room, her expression a mask of pure, undisguised contempt. She was tall and slender, with razor-sharp cheekbones and platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe chignon. She wore a blood-red dress that seemed designed to command attention. "Who is that?" Elena asked Julian under her breath. Julian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That is my cousin, Veronica Sterling. She's the head of our mergers and acquisitions department, and she believes the Foundation is a sentimental waste of money that could be better used buying out our competitors." As if summoned, Veronica glided towards them, a predatory grace in her movements. "Julian, darling," she said, her voice like chilled champagne. She kissed the air next to his cheek before her cold, calculating eyes landed on Elena. And you must be the new project, the little waitress from the diner. The whole building is buzzing about you. The words were delivered with a smile, but they felt like tiny, sharp icicles. Elena Rossi, this is my cousin, Veronica Sterling, Julian said, his tone clipped. It's a pleasure to meet you, Elena said, offering her hand. Veronica ignored it, instead letting her gaze sweep over Elena from head to toe, a dismissive, appraising look that made Elena feel like a specimen under a microscope. Charming, Veronica said, the word dripping with condescension. It's truly inspiring how you're branching out into philanthropy, Julian. A real passion for the downtrodden. Tell me, Miss Rossi, what are your qualifications for advising on a multi-million-dollar endowment? An expertise in coffee-to-water ratios? The insult was so direct, so venomous, that Elena was momentarily stunned. Julian stepped forward, his expression thunderous. Veronica, that's enough! But Elena found her voice. She had dealt with rude customers her whole life. Veronica was just a better-dressed version. She looked Veronica straight in the eye, her own expression calm. My qualifications, Ms. Sterling, Elena said, her voice clear and steady, are a deep and personal understanding of what it's like to be on the receiving end of charity. I know the difference between help that empowers and help that humiliates. My expertise is in knowing what it feels like to choose between paying for rent and paying for medicine. I'm here to make sure your cousin's money actually saves lives, instead of just making him and his friends feel good about themselves at parties like this. Now, if you'll excuse me. She gave a small, polite nod and walked away, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. She didn't stop walking until she reached a deserted balcony overlooking the city lights, her heart pounding with adrenaline. A moment later, Julian was beside her. I'm so sorry, Elena, he said, his voice tight with anger. Her behavior was inexcusable. Don't be, Elena said, taking a deep breath of the cool night air. She just confirmed what I already suspected. To everyone here, I'm not an advisor. I'm your pet project, the charity case you cleaned up. That's not true, not to me. It doesn't matter, she said, turning to face him. The city lights glittered behind him, framing him in a halo of power and wealth. She's a part of your world, Julian. A world of people who see someone like me as something to be pitied or used. I don't know if I can survive in it. You are stronger than any of them, he said, his voice low and intense. He took a step closer, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. His touch was warm, sending a jolt through her. You stood up to her in a way no one has in years. Don't let her chase you away. They stood there for a long moment, the noise of the party fading into the background. In his eyes, she didn't see pity. She saw admiration, respect, and something else, something deeper that she was too afraid to name. She knew then that Veronica Sterling wasn't just a casual threat. She was a serpent in this gilded garden, and she had just declared war. And Elena was beginning to realize that the biggest danger in this new world wasn't the enemies like Veronica. It was the man standing in front of her, the one who had the power to not just change her life, but to break her heart. The confrontation with Veronica was a turning point. It solidified Elena's resolve. She wasn't going to be intimidated. She wasn't going to be a pet project. She was going to earn her place. She threw herself into the work, poring over grant proposals and financial reports with the same meticulous attention she'd once used to balance her tips. Julian gave her complete autonomy. He never questioned her judgment, even when she championed small, unorthodox projects over the more prestigious, board-pleasing ones. She recommended funding for a mobile health clinic in a low-income neighborhood, a legal aid service for tenants facing eviction, and a skills training program for single mothers. These were not the glamorous charities the Sterling name was used to, but Julian backed every one of her decisions, defending them fiercely in board meetings. They fell into a comfortable professional rhythm. They spent hours in the conference room, debating the merits of different proposals. They visited community centers and homeless shelters together, Julian listening intently as Eleanor spoke with residents, her natural empathy drawing out stories and needs that would never appear on a formal application. During these trips, the professional lines began to blur. She saw a different side of Julian, not the billionaire CEO, but a man hungry for genuine connection, a man burdened by a legacy he was trying to reshape into something better. He spoke of his lonely childhood, of a father who expressed affection through stock options and trust funds. She, in turn, found herself opening up about her dreams of being an architect, about her mother's courage, about the quiet, gnawing fear that had been her constant companion for so long. A fragile intimacy grew between them. It was in the shared smiles over a successful project visit, the way he'd bring her coffee just the way she liked it, the lingering glances across a crowded room. Elena felt herself being pulled into his orbit, a dangerous, thrilling pull that she fought against with dwindling conviction. One afternoon, she was reviewing a proposal for a large-scale urban renewal project in Kensington, a notoriously blighted neighborhood in Philadelphia. The proposal was from a well-established developer with strong political connections. On the surface, it looked perfect. New housing, green spaces, community centers. But something about the language felt hollow, full of corporate buzzwords, and lacking in genuine community engagement. To do her due diligence, she decided to dig into the history of Sterling Industries' own involvement in urban development. Arthur, ever efficient, granted her access to the company's digital archives, a vast, labyrinthine collection of documents spanning 50 years. She spent days sifting through old project files, cross-referencing names and locations. Most of it was standard corporate history. But late one night, deep in a folder of subsidiary acquisitions from the late 1990s, she found something that made her blood run cold. It was a file on a company called Chemico Solutions, a chemical manufacturing plant that Sterling Industries had acquired in 1998. The plant was located on the outskirts of Philadelphia, right next to a working-class residential area. Her old neighborhood, the neighborhood she and her parents had lived in until she was 10 years old. Her fingers trembled as she clicked through the documents. Environmental impact reports, internal memos, legal correspondence. A memo from 2001 spoke of minor contained soil and groundwater contamination from a leaking storage tank. Another, a month later, discussed cost-effective remediation strategies that involved monitoring rather than immediate cleanup. Then she found the lawsuits, a handful of them, filed between 2002 and 2004. Families in the adjacent neighborhood claiming a spike in rare cancers, autoimmune disorders, and respiratory illnesses. They alleged the Chemico plant was the cause. Elena's heart felt like it was going to beat out of her chest. Maria's MS symptoms had begun to appear in the early 2000s. The doctors had always called it a tragic mystery, a cruel genetic lottery. But they had lived less than a mile from that plant. She dug deeper, her search now frantic. She found records of sealed settlements. Sterling Industries had paid off the few families who had sued, making them sign ironclad non-disclosure agreements. The lawsuits had been quietly dropped, the story never making the papers. The company had then sold the Chemico subsidiary to an overseas holding company and bulldozed the plant, turning the land into a commercial warehouse park. They had buried their mistake. Literally, her world tilted on its axis. The company that was now paying for her mother's expensive treatment was quite possibly the very company that had made her sick in the first place. This money, this apartment, this entire new life. It felt dirty, like blood money. And Julian, did he know? Was this why he had sought her out? Was this all some elaborate, twisted form of penance? The thought was a dagger to her heart. The trust she had begun to build with him, the fragile hope of something more, crumbled into dust. She felt a wave of nausea. She looked around the luxurious office, a symbol of the wealth built on the silent suffering of families like hers. She was a hypocrite, a fraud, bought and paid for by the man whose family may have destroyed her own. Her phone rang. It was Julian. "I was just thinking of you." His voice was warm, cheerful. "I just approved the funding for the mobile clinic. They start service next week. You did that, Elena. How about we celebrate? I'll pick you up for dinner in an hour." Elena looked at the damning evidence on her screen, the names of the families, the dates of her mother's decline, the cold, corporate memos. "No," she said, her voice hollow and distant. "No, I don't think so." "Elena, are you all right? You sound strange." "I'm fine," she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "I just need to work. I'll see you tomorrow." She hung up, her hand shaking so badly she could barely press the button. She couldn't face him. Not yet. Not until she knew the full truth. She had to find the other families. She had to find proof. And then she had to confront the man who had given her everything and who may have been complicit in taking it all away. For the next week, Elena lived a double life. By day, she was the diligent, insightful consultant, going through the motions of her work at the foundation, her interactions with Julian polite but strained. He noticed her distance, his brow furrowing with concern whenever she deflected his questions with vague excuses about being tired or stressed. The guilt was a constant, bitter taste in her mouth, but it was overshadowed by a cold, burning need for the truth. By night, she became an obsessive investigator. Fueled by coffee and a growing sense of dread, she cross-referenced the names from the sealed lawsuits with public records, social media, and old phone directories. Many had moved away, their digital trails gone cold, but she found one. A man named George Carpenter, whose wife had been the lead plaintiff in the case before her death from a rare form of leukemia in 2005. He still lived in Philadelphia, in a small row house not far from her old neighborhood. Summoning all her courage, she drove to his address one Saturday afternoon. The man who answered the door was stooped and weary, his eyes holding a permanent sadness. When Eleanor explained who she was and mentioned the chemical plant, his face hardened into a mask of old pain and anger. He invited her in, and for the next 2 hours he told her everything. He spoke of a vibrant community decimated by illness. He talked about his wife, Sarah, a vibrant woman who withered away in months. He described the legal battle, the corporate lawyers from Sterling Industries who drowned them in paperwork, who intimidated witnesses, who offered them paltry sums, as he called them, to make the problem go away. "We took the money," George said, his voice thick with shame. "We were broke from the medical bills. They made us sign a paper, said we could never talk about it again. They bought our silence while Robert Sterling's name was being plastered on museum wings." He showed her a box of documents his lawyer had told him to destroy. He'd kept them, hidden in his attic, a secret testament to his wife's stolen life. There were independent soil sample reports showing dangerously high levels of toxic chemicals, doctors' notes linking them to specific illnesses, and letters from Sterling's legal team that were chilling in their dismissiveness. Robert Sterling knew, George said, his voice a low growl. He knew exactly what was happening. His own internal reports confirmed it. But it was cheaper to pay us off and bury it than to shut down the plant and clean it up properly. Elena left George Carpenter's house, feeling like she couldn't breathe. It was all true. Everything she had feared, and worse. This wasn't an accident or a corporate oversight. It was a deliberate choice, made by Julian's father, to sacrifice the health of innocent people for profit. The foundation, the job, the black card. It all seemed like a grotesque mockery now. A way for Julian to assuage a guilty conscience she wasn't even supposed to know about. The intimacy they had shared felt like a violation, his kindness a calculated manipulation. She knew what she had to do. She called Julian and asked him to meet her at the foundation office that evening. She said it was urgent. When he arrived, he found her standing in the darkened conference room, a single lamp illuminating a stack of papers on the table. She looked pale and resolute, her eyes shining with an emotion he couldn't decipher. "Elena, what's going on?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "You've been 1,000,000 miles away all week." She didn't answer. She simply slid a document across the polished table. It was a copy of an internal chemico memo from 2001 detailing the chemical leak. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "RS, legal advised to contain this internally. Remediation costs are prohibitive. Recommend monitoring and settlement strategy. RS, Robert Sterling." Julian picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the page. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, then dawning horror. He looked up at her, his expression stricken. "Where did you get this?" "Does it matter?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "My mother has multiple sclerosis, Julian. The doctors never knew why. She was perfectly healthy until we moved away from the neighborhood bordering this plant. George Carpenter's wife is dead. How many others are there? How many other lives did your father's settlement strategy destroy?" The words hit him like physical blows. He stumbled back, sinking into a chair, his face ashen. I didn't know. My God, Elena, I swear to you, I never knew any of this." "Didn't you?" she pressed, her voice breaking with the agony of her betrayal. "Or was it just easier not to look? Is that why you came to the diner? Did you find my name in some old file of victims who didn't get paid off? Was this whole thing, the job, the money, all of it, just your way of cleaning up your father's mess without ever having to admit the crime?" "No," he exclaimed, standing up, his voice raw with anguish. "No, I swear on my life. I found you by chance. I was drawn to you. What I felt for you, what I feel for you, is real. This—" he gestured wildly at the papers. "This is a nightmare. It's been my mother's nightmare for 15 years. Elena finally screamed, the tears she had held back for so long streaming down her face. "My nightmare. Every day watching her fade away, every dollar I had to beg, borrow, and steal to pay for her care. And it all leads back here. To this room, this company, this family." She reached into her purse and pulled out the black card. She threw it on the table, where it landed with a metallic clatter. "I want nothing from you," she said, her voice dropping to a desolate whisper. "Not your money, not your job, not your pity. Everything you've given me is tainted with the same poison that sickened my mother." She turned and walked towards the door, her body trembling. "Elena, wait," Julian pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please, let me make this right." She stopped at the doorway, her back to him. "You can't," she said, her voice devoid of all hope. "You can't give my mother back her health. You can't give George Carpenter back his wife. Some things can't be fixed with a checkbook." She walked out, leaving him alone in the silent, opulent room, the evidence of his father's sins laid bare on the table between them. The gilded cage had shattered, and the truth was far more ugly and painful than she could have ever imagined. The truth Elena left on his conference table became Julian's crucible. There was no hesitation, only a cold, sickening clarity. For 48 hours, he and his assistant Arthur conducted a furious excavation of his father's private archives, unearthing a legacy of corruption that went deeper than Elena had even discovered. The cover-up was deliberate, ruthless, and sanctioned at the highest level. Armed with irrefutable proof, Julian didn't seek to mitigate the damage. He sought to amplify the truth. He called an emergency board meeting, where he systematically laid out his father's crimes. His cousin, Veronica, was apoplectic. "This is corporate suicide," she snarled. "You're destroying our family's name over ancient history." "Our family's name is already destroyed," Julian retorted, his voice quiet but absolute. "It was built on the suffering of people like Elena Rossi. I'm not here to save our name. I'm here to begin to pay the debt." The next morning, Julian Sterling stood before a wall of cameras and confessed everything. He didn't use the softened language of corporate apology. He used words like crime, cover-up, and justice. He announced the immediate termination of all complicit executives and the formation of a multi-billion-dollar independent trust to provide lifelong care and compensation for every family in the Kensington neighborhood affected by the Chemico plant. From a small new apartment she had rented with the last of her own money, Elena watched the press conference. She saw not a billionaire trying to fix a problem, but a man deliberately setting his own empire on fire because it was the right thing to do. It wasn't an act of pity. It was an act of profound atonement. A few days later, a formal letter arrived from the new trust, detailing the comprehensive care plan for her mother and a settlement offered as damages. It was closure, official and impersonal. Weeks turned into months. Maria's health stabilized under the care of the best doctors, and Elena, free from the crushing weight of debt, re-enrolled in her architecture program. One evening, drawn by nostalgia, she stopped into the Starlight Diner. As she sat in the familiar corner booth, the bell on the door chimed, and Julian walked in. He saw her and froze, a world of uncertainty in his eyes. He slowly approached her table. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi," she replied, a small, sad smile on her face. "What you did," she began. "It was brave. It was necessary," he corrected her gently. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Elena. I hope you've found some peace." She looked at the man across from her, no longer a prince or a patron, but someone scarred by the same truth she was. The chasm between them was still there, carved by decades of lies. But as they sat in the quiet diner where it all began, the air was no longer filled with secrets, only the faint possibility of a new foundation, built not on a wish, but on the hard, solid ground of a reckoning. Elena's story isn't about a lottery ticket or a fairy tale prince. It's a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't about what you can buy, but what you can't. It's about integrity, the courage to face a terrible truth, and the strength to demand accountability. Julian didn't save Elena with his black card. He began to save himself by taking responsibility for his family's past. Their journey shows us that the most profound changes in our lives often come not from a simple wish, but from the difficult choices we make when faced with an impossible reality. What would you do if you were handed that kind of power? What secrets would you be willing to uncover? If this story of struggle, secrets, and redemption moved you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who appreciates a story with depth. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more real-life dramas that explore the moments that truly define us. Thank you for watching.